Well, it was certainly a new way of doing Prime Minister's questions. The newly elected Labour leader, Jeremy Corbyn, crowdsourced his list of inquiries and read them out, one by one, to David Cameron. Marie, Stephen, Paul, Claire, Gail and Angela all had their moment of fame as the leader of Her Majesty's opposition asked the Prime Minister their questions. So it was much less shouty than the usual sessions, but was it any more effective? Well, John's been speaking to Mr Corbyn, but first, here's our political editor, Gary Gibbon.
Jeremy Corbyn entered the chamber almost unnoticed, feted at Labour rallies, an unsung hero at his workplace. David Cameron was cheered by his MPs. The chamber was packed. How would the man who said he'd change politics change this theatrical institution?
So I thought my first Prime Minister's question time, I'd do it in a slightly different way. And I'm sure the Prime Minister is going to absolutely welcome this, as he welcomed this idea in 2005. But something seems to have happened to his memory during that period. And so I sent out an email to thousands of people and asked them what questions they would like to put to the Prime Minister. And I received 40,000 replies from a woman called Marie, who says, what does the government intend to do about the chronic lack of affordable housing and the extortionate rents charged by some private sector landlords in this country? Prime Minister.
Prime Minister.
Well, first of all, Mr Speaker, can I congratulate the honourable gentleman on his resounding victory in the Labour leadership election. Now, let me answer very directly Marie's question, because we do need to see more affordable housing in our country. We delivered 260,000 affordable housing units in the last Parliament. We built more council houses in our country than in the 13 previous years had been managed.
I've got a question from Stephen, who works for a housing association, who says that the cut in rents will mean that the company he works for will lose 150 jobs by next March.
Prime Minister.
What I would say to Stephen and all those working in housing associations and doing a good job is that I think for years in our country we had something of a merry-go-round where rents went up, housing benefit went up, and so taxes had to go up to pay for that.
And so I ask a question from Claire.
And on it went.
Paul, for example, says this very heartfelt question.
He name-checked his emailers. It was a bit like a phone-in. Adult politics, Jeremy Corbyn said. Some MPs laughed and muttered. We asked members of the public who'd been in the gallery watching the exchanges, were they impressed?
For the first time, I could watch the PMQs and think, you know what, I was actually being represented.
He worries about the people first and then trying to get the economy afterwards, and I think that's really important. It was an okay performance. He didn't shame himself, he didn't embarrass himself, but he didn't set the world on fire. It didn't feel like a new kind of politics.
I don't know which is going to last longer, this new form of question time or Corbyn, to be honest.
Hang on, I don't know if it's any good. I just had a picture with him. He said it was very, very nerve-wracking, and I said, I didn't mean respectfully, he needs to brush up on his skills. And he said, yes, he was very nervous. And then he actually, it was quite strange because I just had a picture with the Fusilier and he stood like this next to me, but Jeremy Corbyn, I don't know him, was like hugging me.
And that's why the figures show that a family... So I thought this was the new question time.
David Cameron ticked off Labour MPs for jeering him, saying they'd forgotten the new politics already. After this session, there were hugs and smiles amongst Jeremy Corbyn's inner circle for the first time this week.
There are many profound problems remaining for Jeremy Corbyn, not least he wants to deliver policy trophies from his mandate amongst the Labour selectorate, but he's got a whole load of MPs, many of them in his own shadow cabinet, who are determined to oppose him tooth and nail. One shadow cabinet member said to me, there is going to be a massive bust-up, bigger than the 1980s. It'll come at some point, and it'll have to be brutal, putting the left in a box for 30 years or out of the party.
The opposition leader has appointed a shadow chancellor who believes terrorists should be honoured for their bravery.
Jeremy Corbyn was condemned for making John McDonnell his shadow chancellor. But one Jeremy Corbyn aide said they'd had a good day and hoped they'd now get some respite from a run of bad publicity.
Gary Gibbon at Westminster. Well, a little earlier I went down to Westminster myself, to Mr Corbyn in his office there, and I began by asking him about his policy on Europe.
The policy is that we want to see a more social Europe, a more inclusive Europe, or a Europe of workers' protection, a Europe of social protection. Those are the Labour demands. They can obviously only be achieved if you're within the European Union to do so. Does it mean we give the Prime Minister a blank cheque to go away and sign off many of the rights that have been very hard won? Absolutely no.
But your instinct is to battle to stay.
My instinct is that because I want to see a Europe that does more for social protection, does do much more for environmental protection, and not simply a Europe of the free market.
Welfare, benefit cap. You've called it social cleansing. One shadow cabinet member says it should be consulted on, another says you should keep it. You're the leader. What is the policy?
My view is that the benefit cap is a false figure that was introduced to assume that some families are getting a vast amount of money.
So what's the policy?
Well, the policy is that we work within the total budget of 120 billion. My proposal, which the party will have to discuss, and they will, is that we should not impose the current benefit cap.
And if the party disagrees, you'll live with it?
Well, of course. I'm a Democrat.
Trident, you want to get rid of it? Tom Watson, your deputy, wants to keep it. What's the policy?
We're having discussions. Obviously, I put it very clearly out there. My view was that when the vote comes in Parliament in 2016, as it probably will, we should not vote to renew Trident, because I want to see us fulfil our obligations under the Nuclear Non-Proliferation Treaty.
But if the party says we will back Trident...
To me, this is a very, very serious issue. Everyone, I think, is pretty well aware of my views on wanting to live in a non-nuclear world. Now, there's going to be that debate. That debate is going to be held in a respectful, democratic manner. I hope the party will come to a position of wanting us to become a nation that does not renew nuclear weapons, but we're not going to divide and ruin ourselves as a party over this. There may well be disagreements we all have to live with.
So if they do decide to keep it, you would live with it? You wouldn't resign?
I'm not resigning because I've been elected on a mandate from 250,000 people, more than 250,000 people.
Well, that brings us to how policy is made. I mean, how is Labour policy going to be made? You've already indicated it's the party. You're not going to sort of dictate. You're a Democrat, as you say. What about these other people who voted out there, the 250,000 and the rest? How are you going to tap them in?
Well, I'm hoping that those who are registered as supporters in this election will become full members, and there are indications that many of them have. Our party membership has gone up 30,000 in the first 3 days after the election result of myself was declared, which indicates a great interest in the Labour Party. We're very pleased about that.
Well, do you use conference, therefore, to make a decision?
We have to look at our policy-making process quite a lot. Ultimately, conference must be the main decider. We cannot change all of that by this conference, which starts in 10 days' time. What we're going to have to do is change our policy-making process to empower local constituency parties and affiliated unions and take it through to conference in the future.
But I already detect that this is not quite the strident Corbyn that used to exist in Islington. You seem to be in quite a compromising mood, to live with decisions that you don't like.
No. I have a very strong view on nuclear weapons. Everybody is very well aware of that. I know there are people that don't agree. I would try and persuade them to go in a different direction. I'm into persuasion, and I'm doing my best to be persuasive. I'm trying to be nice to everybody.
Yeah, but the trouble is, in the long term, the real people you have to persuade are the Greens, UKIP, all the people who did not vote Labour last time.
The fundamentals of the next general election are going to be on the economy, are going to be on education, housing and welfare. Now, those are absolutely key issues, and our economic strategy is going to be central to all this. How we expand the economy, how we create more jobs, how we create fairer opportunities, how we have a welfare system that doesn't force people into desperation and poverty, which is what the tax credit changes yesterday have already done. They've taken £1,300 a year off all those families.
There's one big policy issue coming down the line, and coming down the line soon, and that is Russian forces on the ground in Syria, building up. You don't want to go to war. What would you do then for the people who are dying and fleeing as a result of ISIS and the activities of the Assad government?
Look, I'm in no way a supporter of the Assad government or ISIS, and I don't think anybody would believe that for one moment. But what I would say is that if we go into a bombing campaign, people are going to die in that bombing campaign. People are going to be injured. There may well not be a solution to the whole problem as a result of that.
I mean,
and also,
who
are our allies in this?
Humanity.
Yes.
So what do we do to save them?
We give all the support we can for refugees at the present time. We look for a political development and a solution in the whole area. We involve all the neighbouring countries, Turkey, Iran, etc., every neighbouring country. And we involve Russia in this as well as the USA and the European Union. I'm looking for a very rapid political development in the area. We're not there yet on what's going to happen. We don't know what the Prime Minister is going to suggest, but we do know is that he authorised drone attacks, which is legally questionable.
And if Europe somehow finally calls for quotas and succeeds in getting most countries to agree, would you advocate Britain taking whatever quota the European Union tells us to take?
Absolutely, and I think it was a great mistake that Britain didn't join the European Union refugee programme when it should have done a couple of 3 years ago, because we have a responsibility, just like every other country, under the Geneva Convention of 1951, to take people who are victims of oppression, war and all those awful things, and we should take our share.
It's been a tricky few days, hasn't it? I mean, over things which really are not about policy, but are indeed about you and your deportment, if you like. I mean, the national anthem. You didn't sing it yesterday, but you're going to sing it in future. When did you last sing it?
Oh, I've sung it. I was there yesterday out of respect for those that conducted the Battle of Britain and conducted the Second World War. It was a very interesting occasion. And I tell you what, I was thinking about my mum and dad. My mum was an air raid ward and my dad was in the Home Guard. They were part of that war. There are a whole generation of people whose whole lives...
Would they like you to have sung the national anthem?
I have no idea. They're not with us anymore.
But you're going to sing it now?
I'll be around, don't worry. And I'll be
so
respectful
in a sense,
and
you're sort of
participative.
recognising that there are certain things that a leader of opposition has to do.
I fully respect that generation and all they achieved. They gave us our health service, our housing, our social structures in Britain. I fully recognise all of that. I want a peaceful world in the future, and I make that clear at the same time. I've spent the last 30 years as an MP for my constituency. I attend all of the appropriate events in commemoration of the Holocaust, of wars, and all those things, and that is what I have to do as a local MP and what I have to do as a party leader, and will do.
The difficulty is when you have something like the national anthem in this great moment of remembrance, etc., there are bound to be people who say, hang on a minute, I'm singing the national anthem because this is the country I love. I wonder whether he really loves the country as much as I do. Do you love the country?
Of course I love this country. I was born and brought up in this country, and I love this country for so many things. But I love this country to be socially just, a fair country, a decent country. I love our NHS, and I love those things about our country. And that is what is really important, and that is what Labour is really about.
You know what people are saying. You know, Jeremy Corbyn, lovely man, but he isn't up to it, is he? Are you up to it?
Well,
I mean, it's a massive job.
I've been elected to lead our party, and I'm very proud of that. I'm very proud of the result we achieved. I'm very proud of the enthusiasm, the optimism, and the determination of all those people that have put me in this put me in this position. And a democracy, yes, puts pressure on everybody, including me, to do our best to deliver things. That is what democracy is about. I wouldn't be doing this if I didn't think I was able to do it.
They watch you every minute, and you somehow have to cope with that.
I do have to cope, and I will cope.
Jeremy Corbyn, thank you for talking to us.
Thank you.
Well, we're joined again now from the House of Commons by our political editor, Gary Gibbon. Gary, watching that interview, what did it tell us about how policy will be decided in the Labour Party now?
Well, there was an interesting phrase Jeremy Corbyn used there. He said, we have to look at the policy process quite a lot. What he's talking about there, and these are plans that are in no way fully fleshed out, but just beginning to emerge in his camp, is how he can use the membership and the people who aren't yet members but helped to elect him, who are registered supporters, how somehow he can galvanise all this support to make sure he gets some policy trophies to show for his victory, to show for his mandate, because at the moment he's going to be frustrated at every turn trying to actually come forward with something other than the new politics of the way he did Prime Minister's questions. by MPs because they so massively outnumber him and oppose him on so many policy areas. I'm told that the team around him, very small team, they would say themselves, most of them, not all of them, very inexperienced. They're hoping that they get a lull now. Parliament has a bit of a break for the conferences. They hope the focus might go off them a bit. They hope that Prime Minister's questions and the way it went creates a sort of fire break from the bad publicity. They can go off and try and work out how they start getting concrete achievements and not just the imagery of Jeremy Corbyn at the top of the party, but something else. And there's an awful lot of MPs who will be determined they get nothing of the sort.
Gary in Westminster, thanks very much.
Well, back now to events here at home, and after a tricky few days, this new Labour leader, Jeremy Corbyn, must have been relieved to have survived his first Prime Minister's questions. But when you're leader of the opposition, controversy dogs your every step. And a warning, there is flash photography at the beginning of this report from our political correspondent, Michael Crick.
A smile for the cameras, but it's not easy emerging each day to face the media and then the Commons when you're not used to intense public scrutiny and you've still got just a skeleton staff. So the new Labour leader's comings and goings haven't all been smooth. Watch this from yesterday morning when a BBC cameraman says he was pulled back by Corbyn's government driver so that he hit his head against a car and ended up overnight in hospital. A woman producer was also slightly injured.
I got into the car. Apparently, somebody's camera fell to the floor during the melee between all these different cameramen. And he then pulled the car door open just as it was pulling it off, as we were pulling off, and said to me his camera had fallen. I said, I'm sorry about that, but it's hardly my responsibility if you lot are pushing each other. And so that was the end of it.
This picture, though, shows the cameraman, James Webb, on a hospital trolley, his eye bruised, his neck in a brace. And today he was off sick. Friends say he feels Corbyn should have shown a lot more concern.
It was a very, very minor incident. Nobody was hurt. I have no idea what damage was sustained by the camera. End of story.
Yet yesterday follows Friday, when one of Mr Corbyn's team twice put his hand on the lens of an ITN cameraman.
Get out of the way!
It's all the more surprising when the Labour leader belongs to the Journalists' Union. In an East End pub this lunchtime, several of Corbyn's supporters had gathered to watch his first front bench Commons performance. And different it was too.
And I asked one from a woman called Marie, from Stephen, from Claire, from Gail, and from Angela.
What did you think of it? Very good, very positive. It's a new format, but I think people will definitely feel very involved with the new way he's asking questions on behalf of people.
Fabulous. I think he was genuinely, just seemed like a really nice guy and is trying to do something different.
I think it was a wonderful democratic gesture to take in 6 questions from the people of Britain. Fantastic. But the problem was it didn't allow him to do, I don't think, what it is that he's probably best at, which was to debate the replies that Cameron gave.
A rather less sympathetic view from a Commons sketchwriter, Andrew from Gospel Oak.
If Corbyn carries on like this, then no one will come to Prime Minister's questions, and in fact we will have lost something, and that would be an enormous pity if he just stands there week after week like a sort of lay preacher, being sanctimonious and tedious and thinking that the duller he is, the more righteous he is, then the occasion will die, but I don't think he'll be able to keep that up.
His fans think, of course, Jeremy Corbyn will prove the conventional commentators wrong again. We, after all, never thought he'd be Labour leader in the first place.
Well, from Westminster, I'm joined by Ken Clarke, who served in the cabinet of 3 different Conservative Prime Ministers. And in Leeds, we're joined by the Labour MP and Yvette Cooper supporter, Naz Shah. Naz Shah first. Prime Minister's questions was apparently found by the Prime Minister to be a lot less stressful than usual. Which isn't really what Labour wants, is it?
Good evening, Taffy. Yes, it was less stressful in terms of a format, but I do think Jeremy Corbyn did have the Prime Minister. I certainly felt, I was watching it from home, and I certainly felt that it made David Cameron very uncomfortable, and he had him on the back foot. So I was pretty impressed.
Well, Ken Clarke, did you feel that? Did you feel that David Cameron was sweating a little bit?
No, I don't actually. But I mean, I think Corbyn did really quite well because it could have been a disaster. And I think the idea of making Question Time a bit more serious is rather a good one. I think David Cameron genuinely rather agrees with that. And I think one reason why we're having this funny protest politics is the schoolboy bear garden atmosphere at Prime Minister's Question Time puts people off. And I thought Jeremy Corbyn really could feel quite pleased that he got through what could have been a tremendous hurdle, and it was an interesting session, certainly for a politician. The problem is, it's going to be regarded as dull by the journalists who like the schoolboy yah-boo and want the diary pieces, and also that David Cameron actually comes over better when he's seriously answering the questions, because sometimes it doesn't go right for him when he feels obliged to make jokes and attacks and generally lark about.
Okay.
So he brings out the best in the Prime Minister. So he'll have to go away and work on that, I think.
Well, Naz, if there's a bit of a consensus there that it was a good day for Jeremy Corbyn on Prime Minister's questions, it hasn't been a magnificent first few days, has it? There's been this sort of chaos over the shadow cabinet, this row over the national anthem. You must do better, surely.
I think Jeremy Corbyn, I'm quite impressed. I'm pleasantly surprised, because one of my biggest concerns were about Jeremy Corbyn's leadership, and I said that before. And I think in the last few days he's proven me, he's impressed me. He's impressed me in terms that he has stood up to what he's delivered on what he said. He has got the shadow cabinet from different areas of thoughts, different schools of thoughts coming together. He has delivered on PMQs. It hasn't been, like Ken has just said, it hasn't been the car crash that the Tories were expecting, or others the critics were expecting. So I'm quite impressed with what he's delivered so far.
So you see a great leader there, hand on heart?
Well, in terms of leadership, the proof is in the pudding. We're 4 days into the job, and give credit where credit is due. So far, you know, he's surprised me, and I was one of those who, and you know, I'm still to see his leadership in action. It's 1 day, 4 days in. It's too early to judge somebody, but so far, you know, somebody who's come from 30 years on the back benches to go through so much change in 3 months, I think is quite remarkable.
So, Ken, Jeremy Corbyn could be a much more fearsome opponent.
He could be if he gets over the appalling difficulties he faces. The last 3 days have been a bit of shambles, but it's all a circus. Everybody's enjoying, really, the extraordinary turn of events. Jeremy Corbyn a month ago would have laughed out loud if you said he was going to be leader of the Labour Party, just as you and I would, because it seemed impossible. And now he faces all kinds of problems. The diary piece things don't matter. He should have sung the national anthem. He'll have to stop being quite so austerely Republican as that. He'll have to make some concessions. He's really got to work out how he's going to run a party. The classic collective responsibility of an opposition shadow cabinet is not going to work. Everybody knows they flatly disagree with each other on many big, important things. Now, how he's going to run it loosely, how he's going to get the public and the press accustomed to the fact that they are going to disagree, how eventually that's turned into something that looks like a government, I actually think are gigantic problems. But he'll survive when we give him the chance to have a go.
OK, Naz, Jeremy Corbyn's been attracting lots of new members to the Labour Party, according to the party themselves, one of whom should potentially be George Galloway, because he said he'd rejoin if Jeremy Corbyn won. How would you feel about him rejoining? You defeated him at the election.
I think I spoke to Jeremy about this issue a few weeks ago, and Jeremy was very clear. He's made it very clear he feels appalled by George Galloway's tactics that he displayed in the 2015 election. I'm also very clear that the party rules are the party rules, and that's what Jeremy said to me personally, and that's how it is.
So you don't think Labour will have him back?
I can't imagine that to be true. I really can't. I'd be surprised.
I think you've got enough problems without having George back. I rather think that's likely.
Naz Shah, Ken Clarke, thanks very much for joining me.